Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Sign the papers, or watch everything you stole turn to ash. Lysander didn't shout. His voice was a terrifying whisper that cut through the silence of the executive suite like a serrated blade. The heavy mahogany doors behind him sealed shut against the prying eyes of the chaotic outer office. He stood at the head of the obsidian conference table, his knuckles white as they pressed against the polished surface, looking down at the man who had once promised him forever. Julian, the golden boy, the fiancé who had smiled like an angel while stripping Lysander of his inheritance. His research and his dignity, now sat slumped in the leather chair, sweat beading on his forehead. But it wasn't Lysander's newfound spine that made Julian tremble. It was the man standing silently in the shadows behind Lysander. A man who wore the same face as Julian, but carved from ice and nightmares. Dorian Vance, the ruthless alpha, Julian's estranged twin brother, and as of 3 days ago, Lysander's husband. To understand the suffocation in the room, one has to understand the gravity of the betrayal. Only a month prior, Lysander had been the heir to the grand Sterling pharmaceutical legacy, a brilliant biochemist on the verge of a breakthrough. Julian had been his charming partner, the face of the operation. But charm is often a mask for avarice. Julian had framed Lysander for corporate espionage, seized the patent for the synthetics formula, and ousted him from the company his grandfather built. Lysander had been left with nothing. No money, no reputation, and a heart shattered into jagged shards. He had expected to fade away. He hadn't expected the dark sedan to pull up to the curb in the rain, the window rolling down to reveal the face of the man who hated Julian more than anyone on earth. Dorian Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, the shadow to Julian's light, had offered a hand. Not out of charity but out of calculation. Or so Lysander had thought. "You can't do this," Julian stammered, his eyes darting between the vengeful angel he had scorned and the demon looming behind him. "Lysander, look at me. It's Julian. We were going to be married. You loved me." "I loved a fabrication," Lysander replied, his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could feel the heat radiating from Dorian behind him, a dark, protective aura that grounded him. "I loved a man who didn't exist. You stole my life, Julian. You thought because I was soft, because I was kind, that I was weak. You forgot that kindness is a choice, not a lack of spine." Julian laughed nervously, loosening his tie. "And what? You went running to him? My defective brother? The one the family disowned because he was too unstable?" He sneered at Dorian. "Did he buy you, Lysander? Is that it? Did you sell yourself to the monster to get back at the prodigy?" Dorian stepped forward. He didn't stomp. He glided, a predator closing the distance. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He placed a large, heavy hand on Lysander's shoulder. It wasn't a claim of ownership, Lysander realized with a jolt. It was an anchor. "Careful, brother." Dorian's voice was a deep baritone, contrasting sharply with Julian's tenor. It was the sound of tectonic plates shifting. "You are speaking to the co-owner of Vance Global. And more importantly, you are speaking to my husband. Every insult you hurl at him is a debt I will collect from your flesh." The power dynamic in the room shifted violently. Julian was the CEO of a stolen company, but Dorian was a titan of industry who had built an empire on hostile takeovers. "The board won't allow this," Julian hissed, trying to regain his composure. "The merger is set. My ownership of the synthetics patent is ironclad." "Is it?" Lysander asked, pulling a sleek black folder from his bag. He slid it across the table. "Dorian and I spent the last 48 hours reviewing the original filing. You were lazy, Julian. You forged my signature on the transfer deed, but you used the digital timestamp from the wrong time zone. You filed it while I was visibly on a flight to Tokyo for the summit you sent me to." Julian's face went pale. "That's a clerical error." "It's fraud," Dorian corrected, his fingers tightening slightly on Lysander's shoulder, a silent signal of pride. "Federal fraud. And since Lysander and I are now legally wed, his assets are protected under the Vance family trust. We have already filed the injunction. The banks froze your accounts 10 minutes ago. Julian scrambled for his phone, tapping the screen frantically. He looked up, horror dawning in his eyes. My access. Denied. You took everything from me? Lysander said, his voice dropping to a whisper again, laden with the grief he had suppressed for weeks. You took my home. You took my work. You took my trust. I slept on a park bench the night you locked me out, Julian. Did you care? Did you think about me even once while you toasted with champagne in my father's office? I did it for us, Julian shouted, slamming his fist on the table, the mask slipping completely to reveal the ugly entitlement beneath. You were too cautious. You wanted to test for another year. The market was ready. I needed the capital. You needed the glory, Lysander corrected. And now you have nothing. Julian's eyes narrowed, shifting into a look of desperation. He lunged across the table, grabbing Lysander's wrist. You listen to me, you ungrateful little... Before Lysander could even flinch, the world blurred. There was a sickening crunch of impact. Julian was pinned to the mahogany table, his face pressed against the wood, his arm twisted painfully behind his back. Dorian had moved with supernatural speed. He leaned over his twin, his face calm, almost bored, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying intensity. I told you, Dorian whispered into Julian's ear, the sound amplified by the terrified silence of the room. Touch him again, and you lose the hand. Lysander watched, breathless. For weeks he had been terrified of Dorian. The rumors in high society painted him as a cold-blooded sociopath, a man who didn't feel. But as he looked at Dorian now, defending him with a ferocity that bordered on madness, Lysander realized the rumors were wrong. Dorian felt everything. He just burned too hot for the world to touch. Let him go, Dorian, Lysander said softly, not out of mercy for Julian, but because he didn't want his husband to break the law in front of witnesses. He's not worth the stain on your suit. Dorian paused. He looked up at Lysander, his dark eyes searching Lysander's face for any sign of fear. Finding none, only a steely resolve, Dorian released his brother with a shove. Julian scrambled back, clutching his shoulder, gasping for air. Get out, Dorian commanded. Security is waiting in the lobby to escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to clear your personal effects. Anything left behind will be incinerated. Julian looked at Lysander one last time, a mix of hatred and regret swirling in his gaze, before he turned and fled the room, a king stripped of his crown. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Lysander and Dorian alone in the sudden, ringing silence. The adrenaline crashed out of Lysander all at once. His knees buckled. He would have hit the floor if strong arms hadn't caught him. Dorian pulled him close, holding him upright against his solid chest. The scent of sandalwood, cold rain, and expensive tobacco enveloped Lysander, a scent that had quickly become his only sanctuary. Breathe, Dorian instructed, his hand rubbing soothing circles on Lysander's back. It's done. He can't hurt you anymore. Lysander buried his face in Dorian's lapel, clutching the fabric of his suit. I thought seeing him would make me feel better. But it just feels hollow. Revenge is a meal that leaves you hungry, Dorian murmured, his chin resting lightly on top of Lysander's head. That is why I insisted on the marriage contract, Lysander. Ruining him isn't enough. You need to build something new. Something he can never touch. Lysander pulled back slightly, looking up into the sharp, angular face of his husband. They were identical to Julian's features, yet entirely different. Where Julian was soft and shifting, Dorian was hard lines and absolute truths. Why? Lysander asked, the question that had plagued him since the rainy night Dorian picked him up. Why go this far for me? You hated Julian, yes. You wanted his company, yes. But you gave me half your shares. You made me your equal. You didn't have to do that to get the patent. Dorian's expression remained unreadable for a moment, his gaze drifting to Lysander's lips before snapping back to his eyes. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of Lysander's jaw, a touch so tender it made Lysander shiver. "Do you remember 3 years ago?" Dorian asked quietly. "The charity gala in Vienna?" Lysander frowned. "I was there with Julian. You weren't there. You were in exile in Singapore." "I was on the balcony," Dorian corrected. "Hidden. Watching. Julian was drunk. He was berating you for wearing the wrong color tie, telling you that you were an embarrassment to the Sterling name. You didn't argue. You just fixed his collar, smiled sadly, and told him he was stressed." Lysander blushed. "I was pathetic." "No," Dorian said intensely. "You were gracious. You were dignified in the face of a toddler throwing a tantrum. I watched you that entire night. I saw how you charmed the investors he ignored. I saw how you spoke about the research with a passion that lit up the room. I realized then that Julian had the jewel of the Sterling family, and he was treating it like a common stone." Dorian stepped closer, his body heat searing through Lysander's clothes. "I didn't marry you for the patent, Lysander. The patent was the excuse. I married you because I was tired of watching my brother break the only beautiful thing he ever possessed." Lysander's breath hitched. This was the slow burn, the smoldering ember that had been waiting to catch fire. This marriage of convenience, drafted in a lawyer's office with cold terms and conditions, was built on a foundation of obsession Lysander hadn't even noticed. You wanted me?" Lysander whispered. "I have wanted you," Dorian corrected, his voice dropping an octave, "since before you even knew my name, and now that I have you, I intend to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are not a victim. You are a king, and I am merely the sword you wield." The declaration hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. Lysander reached up, his fingers threading into the hair at the nape of Dorian's neck. For so long he had been the one giving, the one sacrificing. To be wanted this fiercely, to be protected this savagely, was a drug he hadn't known he needed. "Show me," Lysander challenged softly, his eyes locking with Dorian's. "Don't just tell me. Show me." Dorian didn't hesitate. He captured Lysander's lips in a kiss that was nothing like Julian's practiced, shallow pecks. This was a devouring. It was possessive, demanding, and overwhelming. It tasted of years of repressed longing and the dark satisfaction of victory. Lysander melted into it, opening himself to the invasion, his hands gripping Dorian's shoulders as the world tilted on its axis. They broke apart only when air became a necessity, foreheads resting against each other. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Dorian rasped, his thumb brushing over Lysander's swollen bottom lip. "We have to announce the merger. We have to introduce you as the new head of research and development." "I look like a mess," Lysander laughed breathlessly, smoothing his shirt. "You look like you've been thoroughly claimed," Dorian growled, a smirk touching his lips. "Good. Let them see. Let them all know that the era of Julian is over." Lysander straightened his spine. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. He wasn't just the ex-fiancé who got played anymore. He was Lysander Vance. "Let's go," Lysander said, stepping away and adjusting his cuffs. "I have a company to take back." The weeks that followed were a blur of corporate warfare and domestic discovery. With Julian out of the way, the legal battles were messy, but Dorian's lawyers were sharks who smelled blood. They dismantled Julian's golden parachute piece by piece until he was left with nothing but his rapidly depreciating sports cars and a reputation in tatters. But the real story wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the penthouse apartment overlooking the city, where two men learned to navigate the treacherous waters of a relationship born from trauma. It wasn't easy. Lysander had nightmares. He would wake up gasping, convinced he was back on the street, convinced Dorian was going to throw him out now that the patent was secured. One particularly bad night, a month after the confrontation, Lysander woke up screaming. Before he could even orient himself, the bedside lamp clicked on. Dorian was there instantly, pulling Lysander into his arms. "I'm here," Dorian soothed, rocking him gently. "I'm here, Lysander. You're safe," he said. "In the dream, he said you were using me." Lysander sobbed, the irrational fear gripping him. "He said you were just waiting for the right moment to discard me." Dorian didn't get angry. He didn't dismiss it. He simply shifted, lifting Lysander's chin, so he was forced to look into those intense, dark eyes. "Look at this room, Lysander," Dorian said calmly. "Look at the ring on your finger. Look at me. I have dismantled my own brother's life for you. I have restructured a billion-dollar corporation to fit your vision. Do you really think I did all that for a temporary asset?" "I don't know what to believe sometimes," Lysander admitted, his voice trembling. "I'm broken, Dorian. I'm difficult." "You are healing," Dorian corrected firmly. "And healing is ugly. It is messy. But I am not Julian. I do not require you to be perfect. I require you to be present." Dorian reached over to the nightstand and picked up a thick velvet box. He opened it to reveal a necklace. A stunning, intricate piece of platinum and sapphires that matched Lysander's eyes. "I was saving this for your birthday," Dorian said. "But perhaps you need the reminder now. This is the Vance family crest. My mother's. She told me to give it only to the one who holds my soul." He clasped the cool metal around Lysander's neck. The weight of it was grounding. "You are not a guest in my life, Lysander," Dorian whispered against his temple. "You are the foundation. If you leave, the whole thing collapses." Lysander touched the sapphire, tears prickling his eyes again, but this time from relief. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good," Dorian growled, pressing a kiss to the pulse point on Lysander's neck. "Because I have no intention of letting you go." The final blow to Julian came 3 months later. It was the annual Industry Innovators Ball, the event of the season. Everyone who was anyone was there. Lysander wore a suit of midnight blue velvet, the sapphire necklace resting against his collarbone. Dorian was in stark black, a silent sentinel at his side. They moved through the crowd as a single unit, a power couple that radiated untouchable authority. Whispers followed them, whispers of awe, of envy. And then Julian appeared. He looked haggard. His suit was ill-fitting, likely off the rack. He had clearly managed to crash the event, desperate for a connection, for a lifeline. He spotted them and made a beeline, a manic glint in his eye. "Lysander!" Julian called out, his voice cracking. The room went silent. "Lysander, please. We need to talk. I'm starting a new venture. I just need a small investment. Just for old time's sake." Dorian stepped forward, shielding Lysander, but Lysander placed a hand on Dorian's chest. "Wait." Lysander stepped around his husband, facing the man who had destroyed him. He looked at Julian, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no fear, just pity. "There are no old times, Julian," Lysander said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "There is only the past, which you burned, and the future, which you are not part of." "But we were partners," Julian pleaded, reaching out a hand. Lysander looked at the hand, then up at Julian's face. "I have a partner," Lysander said, stepping back into Dorian's embrace. He felt Dorian's arm wind possessively around his waist. "And unlike you, he knows the value of loyalty." Lysander turned to the security detail standing nearby. "Please remove this trespasser. He is upsetting my husband." As the guards dragged a shouting Julian away, Dorian looked down at Lysander, a rare, genuine smile breaking the stoic mask of the ruthless alpha. "That," Dorian murmured, "was incredibly hot." Lysander smirked, pulling Dorian's lapel to bring his lips close. "I had a good teacher." They turned back to the crowd, the flashbulbs blinding, the applause starting to ripple through the room. They had won. Not just the company, not just the money. They had won each other. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Lysander take control and Dorian destroy everything for love, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a fiancé who betrayed you for money? Or would you marry his evil twin for revenge? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,